Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui, back at you with another great episode, if I do say so myself. It's hard to pick among my children because I love all of these episodes I put out, but this one is really special to me. This week, we have some very interesting and very dramatic astrology, and before you freak out, just remember that we don't do that here. That is not the kind of astrology that I'm putting out into the world. But when we're talking about collective experiences, things that are happening out in the world, yes, there will be a lot of drama, a lot of intensity this week. But that does not mean that it will be that way for you personally, because collective events affect us all differently, depending on our own lives, our own astrology charts. One of the big things that I want to talk about before we get started today is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which is happening on Saturday, April 20th here in the Pacific time zone. And this is a transit that happens about once every 14-ish years. So we don't get it all the time. It is a big one. And one of the things that this transit signals is massive change. And massive change often comes as the byproduct of maybe things that we don't necessarily love happening in the world, showing us that there is a need to do things differently. Some of the things that I can think of off the top of my head: climate crisis. We've also got rising fascism across the globe. In fact, this week we just had the Supreme Court in the United States come out and effectively abolish the right to mass protest in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. None of this should be surprising to those of us who have been paying attention to the way that things have been going here in this country for decades. The need for change is very apparent. We need to make things better because for a lot of people in the world, things are not going so well. We are being taken advantage of, exploited in different ways and in different places. But the fact of the matter is that is something that connects most people in the world at this point. And I really want people to remember that as we go forward. That these issues are not things that are happening to us individually. These are collective problems that require us coming together to address them. I say often on this podcast, the collective is made up of individuals. So while all of that is true, our job is to control the things that are within our control, within our power, our experience, our skills, talents, and interests. And we're also going to need to do those things in connection with others in some way. That doesn't mean that every single one of us is going to have to be involved in group projects constantly all the time, or we can't do independent work. But if we are not connected with others when we're doing these things, I don't know that we're necessarily working towards collective liberation if we're not doing it in concert with other people, if we're not connecting what we're doing to other people in some way and coordinating on a mass level, because I believe that is really what we need to do going forward. Because obviously, our government and a lot of other governments aren't really listening to the people. That's kind of what fascism does. So we're going to have to be very inventive. We are going to have to do things differently, outside of the box, building new systems. We are going to have to take our power. It will not be handed to us. We can see that very clearly. So I think with this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, we are going to see that come to the fore. It's going to be very clear to those of us who feel the way that we feel, that things need to change so that people can live better. That should already be very obvious to all of us right now. But with this energy, it is really important to not get in your head about things. Because often when things are stressful in the outer world, it's really easy to personalize it, internalize it, live in that fear, apprehension, risk in this situation by doing something that I've never done before doesn't feel safe to me. And it's Aries season. Like we've been saying, we need to be brave. We need to expand our ideas of what it means to work with others. We need to feel into what we want for ourselves, for the collective, and what we are good at, and acknowledge that times are changing, And with this energy, we might find ourselves having epiphanies about that, about how we want to move forward, what direction that we want to go in, and how to make that possible. We might even find ourselves having these light bulb moments about which direction that we even want to go in at all. And it may be unexpected. It may really be something that we haven't looked at before. And of course, the key is not to be impulsive and just run off and do whatever pops into your mind. You really need to be tuned into yourself. Connect with yourself. Know what is authentic to you. So when those ideas come in, you're like, aha, that's it. It'll feel right. So what I would like people to do for this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is acknowledge that change is here to stay. Let that sink in. And understand that change can be good for you too. And understand that you can harness that change to make things better for yourself on an individual level, make things better for the community around you, and make things better for the collective in whatever way feels right and appropriate to you. This is not a time to default to what you've always done, to sit there and hold yourself back. It really isn't. Things are changing. Find the opportunity in change. And also change your beliefs around being isolated, that you can't make a difference, that you're in it alone, that you're doomed. This is an opportunity to lean into radical optimism and radical possibility, because as I say so many times on this podcast, change starts with believing that it's possible. You and me and everyone who wants a better world can tune in, connect, and harness this change for collective good. And it's not going to look the same for each of us. We're different people. We live in different places. We have different connections, skills, abilities. But this is innovative energy. This is the time to change things up for yourself, to have a different approach, to understand that the very rules of the game are changing and that doesn't have to be a bad thing for you or for the collective. We are in desperate need of change. Things are very obviously not going well the way they are. And so if we sit in resistance to change, we are kind of reinforcing the idea that things as they are now are fine. They don't need to change. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know that is not true at all. For the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, my contribution to this energy is very special to me. I am actually releasing a book on this day. I chose the day of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction because I really feel like this is the energy that I kind of talk about all the time on this podcast, and it's really making itself known. And I want to help empower people to get connected, to get plugged in, and to be actively involved in making these kind of collective decisions as we go forward, building community. That's really the anecdote to all of this. So the book I wrote is called How to Find Community Using Your Astrology, and it's a very compact little book, but it is packed with information to help you figure out where you might best fit in terms of community organizing. And you don't have to know a lot about astrology to use this book. I designed it with that intention because, of course, not everybody is an astrologer. But astrology can really help us narrow down pathways for ourselves, open doors for ourselves. Because I think when we have a clearer understanding of ourselves, our needs within a community, we can be empowered to choose spaces that just might work best for us, where we might actually be able to set up roots, grow with other people, grow ourselves. And especially for those of us who are new to community organizing, I think that it can be really overwhelming. Like, where do I fit in? How do I get started? And so the goal of the book is really to give people more tools to get plugged in and do it effectively and do it in a way that's right for them. Because this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. Again, we are all different. We all have different skills, talents, interests. And I want people to factor those things into because, of course, I'm not going to be able to sit down with every single one of you and look at your chart and tell you very specifically what it is that I think you should be doing. So the book is really to empower you to make better decisions on that front and hopefully inspire you to get involved if you've been hesitating, if you've been feeling uncertain. With this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, it is in the sign of Taurus, and we really want to be sowing the seeds for the future that we want right now. It is going to take us being inventive and expanding our beliefs in what is possible. Because things that are new to us seem impossible until we're doing them, until we're actually making them happen. And I think that is really magical. I think most people think of magic as, manifesting something out of thin air. And I think that that is actually what we are doing. I don't know that people look at community organizing and go, this is magical in the way that we like to think. But it is. You're creating connection where there didn't used to be one. You're creating systems where there weren't any before, or maybe they weren't as effective as they could be. You're bringing new ideas to the table. You're connecting with other human beings. You're inspiring one another. You're sharing ideas about the future that you want to build. What might work for your community? What might work for the community a few towns over? So how do you get your hands on this book? Well, it's going to be available to my patrons only at this point because those are the people that have supported me in the work that I'm doing and really made this book possible. So if you are a sponsor of this podcast, don't worry, you will be the first to get it. It's included in your Patreon sponsorship. If you are not already a sponsor of this podcast, you can access the book by becoming a sponsor, and that starts at the low price of $5. The book will be coming out as a PDF, so it's really easy for you to access. And after the PDF version of the book comes out, I'm also going to be working on making it into a zine so that it is easy to print from your own home computer. And I've got some other exciting stuff to go with that. So stay tuned for that in the coming weeks. I'm also working on a class centered around the book to answer your questions about it and to help people really get plugged in if they need a little bit more guidance about what's mentioned. Today on the podcast, I have a great conversation with Kendal from the It Really Is That Deep podcast. We talk about collective liberation, spiritual awakenings, and so much more. After that, I give you a heads up on the astrology of the week ahead, including that Scorpio full moon on April 23rd. I am very excited to have Kendal from the It Really Is That Deep podcast as my guest today. How are you, Kendal?
I'm so good. I am so excited to be here. I love petty astrology.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm very excited to have you here. And I'm also a big fan of your podcast as well. That's actually how we connected.
Yep.
So I listened to your podcast for the first time not too long ago. And I vividly remember listening to your episode and you talking about how we really need to change the way that we support one another as we move forward. And I got so emotional listening to you talk because you say so many things on your podcast that I have thought or felt before. And I just felt like so seen in a way, just listening to you talk, and your care, your compassion was just like so obvious. And I was like, this is an ally. Like this is somebody we need to like link up. We need to be in cahoots, I think, a little bit.
I love that.
Right? I was just like, as we're moving forward, Pluto's in Aquarius right now. We're kind of getting this, a second taste test of what that energy is like.
hmm
And the more that we are in this energy, the more I'm like seeing people and I'm like, they're on my team. I'm on their team, that kind of vibe. And I think that's really what it is as we go forward is like, we need to find our teammates. We need to find the people that we resonate with, that we are connected to on kind of a soul level and that we want to build forward with. So, thank you so much for creating a space where your compassion is so evident. And I just want to say, I have your astrology chart here in front of me. You got a hell of a lot of Capricorn energy
A lot.
in there. You got a hell of a lot. And we're both born in the same year. So we have a lot of the outer planets, the tertiary planets in
hmm
Capricorn, but you got 3 personal planets in Capricorn. So I just want to say real quick, as a Capricorn moon, people often don't give Capricorns so much credit for being like as caring as we can be. And I think you're just like, it's so obvious how much you care, and
Thank
it's all
you.
at the top of your chart, so we can really see it in you, I feel like. And so I just appreciate you using your voice and for people like me. There's not a lot of media, I feel like, that speaks to these issues.
It's
And
not.
so, yeah. And so, what made you decide to start your podcast?
Well, first, I want to say I appreciate your kind words because it means a lot. When you're doing something new and you're putting something out in the world, you don't always get a lot of feedback right away. And so, like, I always really hold on to it really dearly because I'm just not getting a ton of it. And I just really, really appreciate it. Oh, man. This is actually the second podcast I've done. I did one, I think it was probably 2021. I did a short one. It was kind of, I think, my test run, but I didn't realize it was a test run.
Mm,
And I really resonated with the medium. I taught myself how to like produce it all, how to edit it in GarageBand, and like everything from scratch. And it really was like a powerful experience for me. And so coming into this season of my life and having a very different like consciousness awareness level, if that
mm-hmm.
makes sense,
Yeah, absolutely.
I was really seriously thinking about where I fit in with the collective and really asking myself for the past 2 years, really serious questions about who I am as a person and what I bring to the table. And honestly, I just like to talk.
I feel you on that one.
I, I'm a writer, I'm a creative, but my two favorite mediums are speaking and writing. And speaking kind of speeds my brain up, but writing kind of slows it down. And I just love the way that I'm able to connect with people through those two things. And so I was like, I want to start a podcast. And I immediately knew I was going to be talking about collective liberation because I think about it all the
Right.
time. Like all the time. My friends and I, like, we daydream about it. We talk about it. We're strategizing. I talk to my mom about it all the time. Like, I'm literally thinking about, like, being a free
Yeah.
person, either individually or for others, like, all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel you on that because I feel like the average person, I think, in America is trained to be very self-oriented.
Mhm.
And I think for some of us who maybe have a different kind of perspective on things, we can see that if there are people that are being disenfranchised, oppressed, not listened to, abused by our culture, none of us are free. None of us are free. And I think for those of us who really live with that, like moment to moment and just like feel it in our bones, like it is really so all encompassing because I'm the same way. We both have our north nodes in Aquarius because we were born in the same year. So the north node is really kind of about what we're here to learn in this lifetime. And I always
Mhm.
say in my readings, we're here to learn a lot of things. It's not the only thing. It's not, we're not here to get it perfect. It's not, people try to make astrology into the struggle that we need to like overcome or whatever. But we both have Aquarian North nodes. We are here to be more collaborative. We are here to
Mhm.
liberate ourselves and others in some way, some fashion. And of course, your North Node is in the 11th house. So I would say that is like especially true for you. Like, I'm not surprised that this is a focus of yours, but I think for us, like, I can just see that through the work that we're doing, it's just part of the direction that we're moving in. It's like
Mhm.
it's not something that we can turn off.
No, it's really not, and I've tried,
Yeah.
and it was really
Yeah.
hard.
It's not doable. And what I found is that the universe kind of orchestrated, it felt like, things for me to give this as much attention and energy in my outer life as it has been taking up in my inner life. Like, I've worked in television for, oh my God, it's been like 12 years now, which is wild. Like, it's been a while. I've been in television for a while and I love television. I love making entertainment, but, as we talk about all the time on this podcast, there's a lot of issues with the industry, and there's
Mhm.
a lot of issues with a lot of industries because human beings really aren't valued in the
Yeah.
way that they should be in most industries, I feel like. So to be able to work on something where we get to speak those feelings and make things out of them, it feels very liberating to me. Like, it is a very different gear for me to be shifted into right now.
100%, me too, and it's amazing, sometimes terrifying,
Yeah, frequently.
'cause you take away those borders that were put there by society or your family or your own expectations. And when you take them away because they were never really meant to be there in the first place, you realize like, oh, I have to like, I don't have anything to hold on to. I have to just be myself. And it's actually amazing. You might, if you try, when you try new things, you might be as broke as you've ever been, but it'll be happier. So
That's true. That is true. And I mean, speaking of that, one of the things that you have talked about on your podcast is the power of our attention.
hmm
I think it is so important for people that are consumers of any media, that includes us, people who make it. We consume it too. And so I think that we just don't think about how much power that we have as audience members, as consumers of media. Like people have a lot of issues with the entertainment industry, and yet they give it a lot of time, money, attention. And I really feel like as we go forward, that we are going to see a lot more independent creatives, because I just feel like that is where I'm seeing things kind of go. Obviously, I'm one of those people where it's like, I spent 5 months last year on strike, and it was a very necessary strike. But now the industry is kind of like, it feels like they're retaliating in a way by kind of shrinking their growth on purpose. Like there just aren't as many jobs and a lot of people are hurting. So I do feel like there's going to be a lot more creative people moving outside of the system, working more independently, especially as we're kind of wrapping up Pluto and Capricorn this year. Like there's a lot of industry shifts happening. So it's so important because, of course, as we all know, it takes money to survive in this world. And so I think it's so important for like audience members to recognize that if they're engaging with content, that affects an algorithm. Like their attention is really, even if you aren't directly giving people money, like your attention is doing something. So how do you talk to people about that, like as consumers of media?
Well, our attention is powerful. Our attention is our power. I think that we forget that we give people a platform. If we all unfollowed, like, I don't know, Taylor Swift, she wouldn't have a platform. She may still make music, she may have a platform in the offline world, but especially when it comes to on social media and on online spaces, if we unfollow them, it takes away a lot of their power to influence us, to connect with us, and for our government to uplift some of these Hollywood people that often share rhetoric or things that are very oppressive for working class people. Those people often get lifted up. If we stop following them, if we stop listening to them, it takes away a lot of our power, a lot of their power. And
Yeah.
so our attention is powerful. That's why our government spends so much money to like propagandize us all the time. There's so much money poured into entertainment, and you know this, being in the
Mhm.
industry and me being on the marketing side of creative marketing of a lot of like movies and different things. I've seen that too, and campaigns. I've done a lot of like copywriting for campaigns. And so like I know how much money gets poured into trying to reach people's minds and their psyches and to influence their ideologies. What we pay attention to is so 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 important.
It's been really great to have a platform like Patreon, which I use and I know that you use in support of your
Mhm.
podcast as well. How do you see things like that shifting things for creatives?
I see that becoming really, really huge, especially given the fact that so there I see this shift that's happening in so I've also been let me pause. I think it's important for people to know I've also been a digital strategist for a long time. So I am a creative that most of my work has been in digital places. So those worlds kind of blend together a lot for me. And what I am seeing is people taking back their power and not wanting to be like kind of slaves to corporate America. And the only way that we can do that, I feel like the only way as a creative that I can make the art that the masses need to hear is to be directly funded by them,
Yeah.
to be in partnership with the collective. And for me, it wasn't necessarily a difficult jump to make because I had kind of already been in a place like that, having been a former missionary
Right.
and being community funded before. I was like,
Right.
well, I mean, in a way, I've kind of done this in a different way without like the, digital platform. So in some way for me, it feels a little funny that I ended up back in a space of being community funded, but now I'm putting out my like art and my like voice out into the world.
Yeah.
And so I see that shifting because I don't think that a lot of us want to be in debt to corporate America. We don't want to be a voice for them. I feel a huge responsibility as a creative and as someone who writes and speaks, and when I speak I know that people tend to listen. I feel a huge responsibility to say things that matter and say things that people actually need to hear, and to not be a mouthpiece for a government that is not listening to its people and not caring for its people, and also to just manipulate people. I don't want to co-opt people's spirituality. I don't want to manipulate people. I don't want to like disempower people. I want to give them power. And came to a point within corporate America where I realized I could no longer lend my voice to their efforts at all in any way and still like be an ethical creative and an ethical writer and speaker. And so platforms like Patreon give us the opportunity to do that. It gives us the opportunity to restore the relationship between the maker of the content and the consumer of the media. And think we forget that there is a beautiful relationship that happens there. I feel responsible to say things in a specific way and to make sure that the messages I'm saying are things that people actually need to hear, and that I do it in a way that speaks to their soul. I feel a huge responsibility to that. There's such an intimacy in that relationship. But also, as consumers, there's a lot of power in that too, and where you put your power and your money. A lot of people are talking a lot about boycotting right now. And one thing that I think is like, okay, we can take our money away from somewhere, which is cool, but where else are we going to put it?
I love that.
And I think backing creatives and entertainment people and media people who are trying to do their own thing and genuinely trying to create the art that the masses need to hear, backing them is really, really, really important.
I agree. I think that the other thing that has happened with social media, and you could probably speak to this with a lot more information than probably I do, because I have not really like ever tried to grow a platform prior to being on TikTok. So this has been kind of just like a weird thing that I sort of like fell into.
Yeah.
I'm by no means like particularly skilled at it. I'm kind of a little bit of a shit poster, as we know. As we know, but, I try to have fun. But I think because of the prevalence of social media and the access to things like podcasts, which are often free, part of what has happened is that there has been a little bit of a devaluation of some of our creativity in some sense. Like, I think people are just used to really having a lot of free stuff. And unfortunately, like that was a big conversation I had to have with myself before I actually started this podcast in earnest, because I have a Capricorn moon and I don't like working for free. It's not sustainable for me because I'm like, how am I supposed to pay my bills? If like I would love to sit here and make stuff all day and record for everybody and give them all the astrology, but a girl's got to eat,
Yep.
So I was like, that is exactly why I started the Patreon to go along with the podcast, because I knew from the kind of practice run that we had with the podcast in season 1, which was purely just like for our fun and entertainment, the amount of work that goes into it, I think is really, you get this fairly seamless end product. And so it might feel like it was effortless, but as you and I know, this stuff takes quite a
It
lot
is
of work.
not. It takes
Yeah.
so much work, so much
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, and money, like, for the
Yeah.
equipment and, if you wanna upgrade things. I just recently did that, and that was, like, a big kind of moment for me, because I was like, "Wow, I really am taking myself seriously." And I was like, "Uh-oh.
Mhm.
Uh-oh." So, we might make it look easy, but it's definitely, like, work, and it's work that is gonna require financing if people want it
Mhm.
to grow and get better, and, kind of even be able to approach the level of podcasts that have, like, whole teams working.
Right, exactly. Because I think, like, when I think about the relationship I have, so, like, me putting out my podcast and then people listening to it, and even, like, people who just maybe interact with my content on TikTok, I include them kind of in the relationship. There's a lot there, and it is a lot of work. But at the end of the day, I always tell myself, I'm putting my work out into the world for me, really, mostly. It's so that I can like, sleep with myself, if that makes sense. Like, I wanna be myself, and for so long, I didn't put my voice out into the world, or I was using my art or my skills to speak for other people, and for the first time in my life, I'm banking on me, And so I often think a lot about I make my content for other people. I want people to see it. I want people to be like have reactions with it. I want it to impact them. But at the end of the day, I'm putting it out there so that I keep the relationship with myself. That I keep the respect with myself, that I'm going to be myself and I'm going to put the art into the world that I think the masses need to hear. And so there's a lot of like relational dynamics that are taking place in my mind on the back of that. And having the Patreon on top of that 100% for the same was like, I'm taking it seriously.
Yeah,
Want to be able to support myself. And I think that when we think about there's been a lot of conversations about like, where are the revolutionary music people? Where are the revolutionary writers? And it's like they're trying to survive.
literally.
And so if you love music or you love writing and you want to hear things that you want to hear artists speak about the things that are happening in the world, things that we actually need to hear and need to be inspired behind and motivated about, you might have to find them and help fund them.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of power to that as an audience member as well. Like you were saying, the intimate relationship between people that are supporting the work that we do.
Hmm.
I'm so grateful to have a Patreon that is growing and is full of people that see what I'm doing, see the value in it, and are getting
Hmm.
something out of it, because I do not want to be making a podcast that isn't making any sort of an impact or isn't in relationship with the people listening to it. That
Exactly.
was yeah, that was like part of the design of this podcast, as I was like, I would like to, be engaged with the community around it, which, goes back to that Aquarian North Node. It's like I'm not
Hmm.
just trying to put stuff out, to make myself feel good and
Yeah.
important. It's in dialogue with other people, and my hope is that it is a part of people's lives in a way that helps empower them, helps make them enjoy their lives more, because I think that in and of itself is so powerful, because I
Hmm.
think that the average person in the United States right now has been really ground down in a lot of ways. And, I think that the more that people can value themselves in a way that the culture is not valuing themselves, it becomes easier to see the things that need to change.
Yeah. That's so true.
So that's my hope with this podcast. You mentioned that you were a missionary, and I know we both kind of share a Christian background. Dun dun dun. So I would love to hear about, like, did you have a moment where you just kind of shifted away from it, or was it more of a gradual thing?
Mine was a dramatic shift.
Okay.
My I don't really do anything halfway. Kinda just I dive right in. I don't know if that's my
Yeah.
Aries rising energy, but I'm just like, go hard or go home. And so
Yeah.
I moved my daughter and I to Ethiopia. We were missionaries and we were there for just shy of 2 years. It was a lot. And it was the first time I had actually been back on the continent of Africa. So it was a very powerful, that in itself was a very spiritual thing for me, knowing that for what I know, I'm the first of my family to return back to the continent of Africa after the slave trade, from what I know, of course, because I haven't done that research. But it was like a very powerful experience. And then it ended abruptly in 2020, of course. When the pandemic hit, no one really knew what was going on, and my daughter Cam and I, we had both been kinda sick, and Cam had been really sick, and I took the opportunity to just, like, literally, I was in church one day, and it was my intuition, and when literally I heard, "It's time to go," and I was like,
Wow.
"Oh, okay." Because I had kinda wanted to go home, but I was having this guilt about leaving. Christian missionaries do this guilt game where they kinda guilt you into staying on the field because they talk about people who have previously left their posts early, and I was feeling like I would have been a failure if I had left early, but then I heard so strongly, like, "You gotta go." And so when I was listening to what was happening with COVID and all that, we packed up what we could and we thought we would be back in the States for maybe a month, and we ended up never going back. And so we lost everything. We had to start all over because we only packed like 8 suitcases and we had a whole home. We had a whole life set up there.
Wow.
And it was a beautiful time in my life, but it was very challenging because I really was watching kind of my spirituality crumble at the same time. I didn't know it at the time, but Pluto was traveling through Capricorn and making a lot of transits to some really powerful planets, and my life kinda came it fin everything kinda came crumbling down. I felt like I lost my mental health, I lost my financial health, I lost my physical health. My daughter was sick, she ended up in the hospital for a week or 2 in 2020 with some digestive stuff. It was really crazy, and then the world was shut down, and it was a pandemic, and so I faced the worst burnout I had ever had in my entire life. Like, didn't even know that it was possible for a human being to fall apart in the way that I fell apart in 2020. And that started the whole kind of exit from Christianity, was that just realizing how we have been so mistreated when we were in Ethiopia. We loved the locals there, but the white missionaries that we were working with were kinda awful, and they were really racist, and it was really, really rough. And I was a single parent too, so I
Right.
was
Yeah,
also,
yeah.
like, I'm a Black, closeted queer, like, a single parent in this super white evangelical setting in Africa, and it was insane.
That's a lot. That is a lot. I can't even imagine, especially like the world was already going through so
Yep.
much on
And
top
then
of that. And then you're having,
my personal world came crashing down. Yeah.
so I've been talking a lot about spiritual awakenings on this season of the podcast with my guests. Do you feel like this was a moment of just like a kind of a huge perspective shift?
Yeah, I think I had a spiritual awakening that kind of started in 2019 and just kept rolling.
You had the extended release.
It was yeah, it was. Even now, like, I know the audience can't see, but I'm, like, grabbing my cheeks like, "Oh gosh." It was so I no, I thought that I was failing, and I think that you talked about how you feel the compassion come across from my content online and the things I talk about on my podcast, and the reality is a lot of the kindness and the compassion and the softness that people see in me that they resonate with now came from watching my life fall apart. Came from thinking that I thought I was failing at the utmost. I thought I was failing as a parent, just as an overall human being. And so I know what that feels like, and I don't want anyone to feel that, because if I had known then what I know now, I would have been like, "Oh, girl, Pluto is just doing some shit, and you need to just let it fall apart. Let
Right?
that shit fall the fuck apart. Oh my god." Like, you can't to fight a Pluto transit like that was you can't, and eventually, I just ended up being like, "I'm just gonna throw my hands up and be done. I
Yeah.
don't know what else to do, I'm just gonna fall apart." And I let myself fall apart, and I'm just now starting to come back together, and this is what people are seeing, is that coming back together, and I'm coming back together, and I got a lot of shit to say. I got a lot to say, and I have a lot to say about how we treat one another. I have a lot to say about the things that are going on in this world, because the funny thing is, when you are so marginalized, when you are so pushed to the edge of society, it gives you a better vantage point to observe everything that's going on. And you understand how things are connected in a way that people who are right in the mix of it don't have the perspective to understand. And so now a lot of me doing my podcast is me taking my power back and saying, fuck that. I'm not going to let people just think that they're failing and think that they are not good enough when it's not true. It has never,
Yeah.
ever been true. And it makes me emotional because,
Yeah.
like, it's just, we're just amazing creatures, and we just get treated so horribly. And I want people to have the access to be human in their
Yeah.
experience, and just whatever that means for them.
I'm 100% in agreement. And I mean, it's a lot. It is a lot to feel like you failed. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are in that moment right now. They're probably going through things not too unlike what you've gone through at this moment. And I think we're going to see a lot more people going through that. And I think for people like you, people like me, who we've got a little bit of a head start on this
Hmm.
stuff. I don't know about you, but I look at myself as a bit of a doula
Yeah.
in the moment that we're in.
Yeah.
It's like, well, been thinking about this shit for a long time.
For me, it was like the past year, I would say, yeah, the past year, it feels like my inner child is shouting, like, I have something to say. I have something to say. And so I was like, okay, then how are we going to say it? And so I just tried out about a lot. I tried out a lot of things before I even started the podcast. I just was practicing and I'm still practicing. The podcast is still evolving, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think it is so important for people to know that, that if they feel like a failure because of the circumstances that they find themselves in, the systems have failed us. They weren't ever designed to really help us in the
Yeah.
first place,
Yeah.
but that's what's happening. And so to internalize it, to make it individual, I think is a misstep that a lot of people make because we are so used to thinking about ourselves and our circumstances. And I always try to encourage people to see where the collective aspect of those things are because it isn't just you and I that are struggling right now. Like it's almost everybody that's kind of like a regular person. And there's a reason for that. And until we see that, we are limiting the amount of power we have
Yep.
to address the situation. Like there's no it just baffles me every day waking up and I'm like there's no reason that we need to be
Yep.
living the way that we do.
Yep.
That we need to be suffering the way that we do as human beings, especially in the United States. And not only do people suffer here, but we export suffering elsewhere so that we can live like as quote unquote comfortably as we do here, or some of us can anyway.
I think suffering is the United States' biggest export at this point.
It
Suffering
is.
and
It
bombs and
is.
dehumanization.
Yeah, and this in the same regard, it's like we need to see our connection to the people that are on the other side of the weapons that we're dropping
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that.
because we're all suffering different symptoms of the same fucking sickness.
It's all connected.
It is. And what kills me is that we are in a phase where a lot of very dangerous spiritual ideas, quote unquote spiritual ideas, are being put out in the mix and stirred up. And so it is all connected. And then sometimes people will take that and then deviate into like conspiracy theories. And I'm like, there's like actual real stuff that sounds like conspiracy theories that is like real. Like, why don't we go that way? Why don't we go that road? So, we can actually address the problem instead of it kind of feels like fan fiction to
It
me,
really
like
is. It's
apocalyptic fan fiction.
still important to do some investigation, you know? Like, as someone who gets on the internet and tells people that it's so great for all of us to talk to each other, which I think it is, I will never not say that. We doesn't I didn't say that we should, like, take everything that we say to heart, but you can listen to someone and still learn something from them if even if what they're saying is not necessarily, like, maybe all the way
Yeah.
factual, but there's other things to understand. And a lot of times, what I am taking from someone, if they're saying something kind of crazy, and I'm like, I don't think that's actually accurate. What I take is from what they're telling me, I can understand a lot more about how they view themselves. And I can understand a little bit more about their living situation or what social economic class they come from, and maybe some of the other ideas. So, like, I'm always reading in between the lines with people because we're weird.
Yeah.
We are weird, and our minds are extremely powerful, and they can play games on us if we aren't careful. Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it just feels like there are a lot of avenues where people haven't really unpacked certain things that maybe they were brought up with. Like, I feel
Mhm.
like with the eclipse that we just had, we saw a lot of fear mongering. And, it was funny because the evangelicals, some of them were literally like, this eclipse is like the return of Jesus or
God,
whatever.
I wish. I'm
That's what I said. I was like, finally.
like, can they y'all just go? Like, I'm tired.
Yeah,
I'm
literally.
tired.
Yeah. I feel like they would be happier. I feel like they would be happier because they're wanting it. They want the world to be over.
Yeah, they really do.
But it's like, these opportunities that people have to take these moments that do have some meaning to them and then flip it
Mhm.
into this fear mongery thing is so concerning to me that people kind of go for that. And
Yeah.
which is also why I try to frame things the way that I do and stay very grounded in what information that I'm sharing because I just feel like there are so many opportunities for people to go down these sort of rabbit holes, like the eclipse is signaling a new reality, and you got to like make the bus to the new reality, I guess. Like there's there's some aspect to it that is scary and urgent, which is strange to me, but like the desire that people have, I think, from not unpacking probably a lot of religious indoctrination around
Mhm.
that stuff and like not unpacking the fear and then just kind of carrying it over to spiritual spaces. Is that something that you think about like in the work that you put out?
I think about that every day. I think about that every day. I've struggled, to be honest, a little bit with like incorporating because I am incredibly spiritual, but because I have been an evangelical and I was a missionary and a pastor, I understand the power that you hold when you speak about spiritual things. I also understand that our spirituality, especially in America, has been very co-opted. A lot of powerful people who don't have the best intentions have really figured out that when you want to get human beings to do things that they typically wouldn't do, you have to be able to appeal to the spiritual sense of them. And I think because we underestimate how powerful that spiritual part of us is, it's just kind of left out there to, if you don't take control over it, it's left out there for people to manipulate and to oppress you or kind of cover you with some crazy ideologies or whatever. And I've struggled with how to bring that into my work now that I'm not necessarily a quote unquote spiritual person, like
Mhm.
in the work that I do. Like I'm not a
Right.
spiritual leader anymore. So I've just kind of decided that I'm just going to bring it in and people are just going to have to deal with it. I mean, I think that human beings are inherently spiritual beings and that
Yeah.
we all have a spiritual side to us that we can choose to engage with or not. I think our lives are better when we engage with it, but everyone's going to be different.
I look at spirituality really as the stories that we tell ourselves about our
Mm,
existence. That's really how I look at it on
yeah,
very, very simple terms.
that's kind of how I look at that too.
Yeah, and so even if you are not a quote unquote spiritual person, you're still telling yourself a story. You have a narrative that you engage in some regard. And so some people that narrative is there's not really anything to engage
Hmm.
with. And so the door is a little bit closed. That's the narrative. For me, like I also take that responsibility very seriously because I do see the way that things that you say can impact people who understand, like as an astrologer, like I understand that I have the ability to see things that other people without that kind of training don't have the ability to see. And so there is a sort of power that people ascribe to that.
Hmm.
And so I take that very seriously. But my hope is that I talk about the things that I talk about. And even in readings and stuff, my assumption is never that I believe the same as the person that I'm working with believes. My goal isn't really to tell people what to believe, it's more to ask questions and hopefully generate thought that makes them engage with their spirituality in a deeper way.
I like that.
Yeah, that's kind of the tactic that I've taken because I really believe that like at the end of the day, no matter what your spirituality is, even if you are like in an evangelical church with other evangelicals, like I do think that it's so individual in a lot of ways, and I think
Very
that that
much
is
so.
completely acceptable. And like coming from evangelical Christian backgrounds, that was something that we didn't get. Like that was
Hmm.
not like the individual. What the fuck are you talking about? This is not about you. You kind of sit down and shut up and nod and smile and try to be good.
Yeah.
So for me, that is, it was very challenging as a child for me to be in that position because I just had so many issues with things and I was always trying to like legislate with God, kind of like,
Yeah.
and also just like, I was like, the things that I'm being told, that doesn't sound right to me. And so I was always trying to like dissect things and be like, where is this coming from? And I never like thought that the God that was being described to me, like I was like, this person sounds like really awful, and
Hmm.
that's not what I'm getting from this.
It's funny because right before we sat down to record this, I actually was cleaning up and I'll put on like a documentary in the background and I always end up getting distracted. But I was watching the Mr. Rogers documentary from like 2018 and I was just thinking about how I was a Mr. Rogers kid later in his life and like his messages of like, you are valuable and you're deserving of love, and how that was just so different. I listened to that, but then I went to church and I was told that my heart was evil. And so there was these like that competing kind of like thought process in my head is something that I still have to work through the competing thoughts and be like, what's true versus what is something that just got planted there that should have never been there in the first place. And I think that when it comes to spirituality and how I incorporate it into the things that I'm doing now, I just want people to know who they are. And I think that connection to yourself and knowing, like you said, everyone's going to, like, I feel like very close to like crystals and like witchy stuff and nature. And I mean, it's different. Or like doing a puzzle is a very spiritual thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
But for some other people, it's not going to be. And so if you want to know like how to improve your spirituality, you have to know yourself. So I just connect people to themselves. And I also try to create a space where people can like feel their emotions. I think that's why I talk about it so much, and I'm very open about how I feel about things and what I'm experiencing in my life, because I want people to resonate with that and know that what they're feeling is okay too. And that's a part of accepting yourself, is accepting how you feel about something. Like if someone calls you a doo-doo head and it hurts your feelings, you should be able to accept the fact that being called a doo-doo head hurts your feelings. That's okay. And I won't call you a doo-doo head if it hurts your feelings. I might call you
Yeah.
something else. You know, like
Right.
that's a valid thing. And we need to stop like
Mm-hmm.
gaslighting ourselves because yeah, for me it's connecting people to themselves.
Absolutely.
And I think too, when you're looking at people online, listen to the people who are pointing you to you.
Oh, well,
If
yes.
someone's pointing you to follow them, I don't know. It has to be an energy where it points you back to you. And that's kind of a guideline that I use because I don't listen to a lot of
Yeah.
people. No, that's not, I listen to a lot of people. I don't take a lot of people's opinions
Right.
to heart. There's very, very few. And one of them is you. When you say certain things, I'm like, when Kaycee talks, I'm going to
Oh.
listen. So, and it's because you point people to themselves. And it's clear that you have a platform, but the goal is not for you to become this powerful person and then have this religion of people follow
Not
you.
yet.
The point is to
Just
become
kidding.
this,
Just
yeah,
kidding.
not yet. The point is for you to become this powerful platform that helps people to connect back to themselves. And that's a difference in energy that I think people should like pay attention to when you're thinking about who you're going to follow or who you're going to listen to or who you're going to give your attention to online in general, even beyond spiritual people. But a lot of these people just want to be rich and they just want a platform. You probably shouldn't platform those people, even if they're talking about stuff that feels important to you. Platform people who care about the collective. If we want to have influencers and celebrities or entertainers who have a backbone and have morals and humanity, that's how we do it. We have to listen to the content of their character and be able to read through the lines and have discernment and not just say, "Oh, you said a funny joke." You instantly get my attention and my follow and now the power that I'm going to give you with my attention.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I have a very similar approach because, like, with astrology, it's like it is about you. You're having the experience. You're the one that is engaging with the rest of the world. And you're right. Like, when you understand yourself better, you have a lot more to offer yourself and others. That's kind of where it starts. We can't escape ourselves. And I do feel like with Christian evangelical teachings, it is so much about getting away from yourself. It's about like
Mhm.
pushing you down to make space, less of me and more of him, you know?
Yes.
And that's something that I had to really sit with because I think that was part of the reason I struggled so much to be a Christian because I don't know how to be anything but myself. And so I was constantly running into these conflicts where it was like these things about me are like not acceptable in this line of thinking. And so it was this internal like battle that was always happening between like am I good or am I bad or I was, like, terrified. At 9 years old, I thought I was, like, gonna be left behind and my family would be raptured because I was at 9 years old, I was, like, too bad to go to heaven, I guess.
I have very vivid memories of that
Yeah,
because from a kid, I knew that I was queer.
right.
I knew that I was attracted to women, and I was just like, "Oh,"
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, "It's no hope for me."
The route that happened for me is that I because of the way that I grew up and I was in schools that were mostly evangelical for my whole life. So it's like not only was I
Oh,
getting
yeah.
getting it at home, I was getting it at school too. So I wasn't around a lot of like people that I knew gay people, but I didn't know like gay kids, I guess. And I don't know, there was some disconnect for me, like, I didn't really, like, figure that out about myself until I was an adult, but what I will say is that there was a lot of fixation in the early 2000s when we were in high school about being gay. It was just like the way that trans rights are an issue now, it was kind of the way that gay rights were at that point. And so I was very uncomfortable because it was so emphasized at school, like how being gay was a sin and it was wrong. And they were like paying extra attention to the issue because I think it was of the moment.
Mhm.
It bothered me so deeply, which is so funny because like duh. But at the time I was like, I was like, it's just not right, you know, like it's just, I didn't, it
Exactly,
made no
yeah.
sense to me. I was like, I just didn't understand why God would like care about that. It felt stupid, but it really bothered me. And then, you know, come to find out, I was like, oh, you're gay. Duh. I was like a really serious ally at that point. I was very bothered.
I remember having this moment I remember having this moment recently. It was like, or maybe, yeah, I think it was 2022. I had met up with a friend that I had had when I was still in the church, and I was way out of the church now. And I was living my authentic self at that point because the whole time I was in the church, I knew I was queer, but and even though I was a pastor on that, I just wasn't going to talk about it because I just didn't believe, like, I already knew that it was okay that I didn't believe all the same things that these people believed, because when you're Black, you automatically kind of like have to, well, you don't automatically, but I was already having to make some of those kind of like thought processes already in my mind,
Hmm.
because if not, then you're in your mind, you're like, how could there be a racist Christian? If you really,
Right.
like
Yeah.
when you really think about it, I have met so many racist Christians
Yeah.
now. So you already had to have like in your mind this thinking that I'm going to believe some things that are different than people that are in my faith community. And so I was okay with like just being like, I'll just be single. Like at the time I didn't want to date. So I was like, it's just not an issue.
Hmm.
My mentor at the time knew, but he was like, we're just going to pray about it.
Oh God. Yeah. Was the community that you were a part of predominantly white?
So my religious trauma is particularly interesting because I've been traumatized both by Black Christians and white ones,
Hmm.
so it's very interesting. Growing up, I was a part of the Black church, which was very much you can't be gay. I couldn't even wear hoop earrings for a long
Oh my
time.
God.
Yeah, you had to wear like stockings and skirts, like it was crazy. And then when I left that community when I got pregnant with my daughter at 20. So I got pregnant with my daughter when I was a sophomore in college, and that was really rough because I was a young Black mom from Baltimore City. So literally, there were people that told me, "Well, now you're just a
Oh
statistic."
my God.
And the pastor of the church that I was a part of growing up, and my father was like a trustee there, my family was very involved, had basically told me that my family would rather I be dead than be pregnant.
Wow.
Yeah. So I exited that community when I became the antichrist for getting pregnant. And I didn't, at that time, I couldn't walk away from my faith because I didn't know anything
Right.
else. Even though I hated it, I was like, well, maybe I'll just go to a different church. Like maybe it was that
Right.
church.
Right.
And then that was when I went into like a kind of like a more diverse, but mostly white kind of area. And that was where I became a minister and a missionary within the kind of white church
Right.
dynamic. It was diverse where I lived,
Hmm.
but it was the organization nationally was very white.
Right. Yeah.
So there was an interesting moment when I was in 2022 when I had come home and I had met up with a friend who hadn't seen me in years. And she was basically like, I always knew you were queer. You weren't hiding it well. And I was like, well, fuck, I just might as well just be out there then.
Right. Oh shit.
like, I'm like, and then I became like super duper queer
Yeah.
or just super duper myself.
Right.
I was just like, I'm gonna be myself.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna wear the things I want to wear. I had always wanted to like be a little more gender non-conforming with the way that I dress, but I was afraid to because I was in a Christian church.
Yeah.
And so that was when I was like, I might as well just dress the way I want to dress and be myself because I clearly wasn't hiding it very well.
It's always so nice to see like when people and I think that happens a lot to queer people is like once we are really like out and proud and like not giving a fuck anymore, to see the real person, you know, like to see all
Hmm.
of that. And I do feel like Pluto energy can be part of that process because, like,
It was.
yeah, it's like that energy is very let go or be dragged. But I also think about it as like a power washer. You know, I don't necessarily want to get sprayed by a power washer, but if I'm covered in like gunk that maybe doesn't need to be there, you know, like that's kind of the
Yeah.
way I think of that Pluto energy when it's, you know, getting real personal.
It really is. And it also feels like just living in molasses. Like you're trying to like move through life at the pace that you were before. And it's just like, no.
Yeah.
It is very I like what she said. It is very much. or be dragged. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very much energy, very much.
100%. I have a Capricorn moon. So I had Pluto go over my moon in the late 2000s was when that happened to me. It was quite an experience. And I'm sure, you've had a ton of Pluto action over
Pluto
the
has
past.
gone over like
Yeah, Pluto got your ass. I can see it in their chart. I'm verifying. I'm verifying Pluto got Kendall's ass.
oh god. If y'all want to see, I'm not encouraging this, but if anyone wants to see what a Pluto transit can do to you, just look at my old TikToks when I first started making TikTok and then look at who I am today. You can see some of the like transformation.
Yeah.
I'm not even the same person. I don't even.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know that's me, but it doesn't even. I transform so much. It's like it doesn't even look like me anymore.
Yeah, and it's so powerful because I think that there's a lot of fear mongering about Pluto because like we've been saying, there's a lot of fear mongering. It's useful
Yeah.
to make people afraid. I try to remind people that as much as possible. Think about who it benefits that you are living in fear. Like it's not you. It's not you. I
Hmm.
promise.
Hmm.
But we can come out the other side of these intense experiences where we're being confronted a lot of times with the programming that we
Hmm.
have internalized that we're probably not even aware of. We have the opportunity with those Pluto transits to let that shit go. And oftentimes, like you were saying, when you don't have anything else to grab onto, it's terrifying to lose what you know, even if it's not even good for you just
Yep.
because it's what is, it's all you know, and so we can cling. It's so human to kind of cling to these things that aren't helping us. And I think sometimes if we kind of can give ourselves the room to trust ourselves, like, hey, maybe let go and see what happens, and maybe trust that you are strong enough to get yourself to where you need to go. And it's so powerful for that reason. I love that you can see it so clearly in yourself, because I like to tell people that Pluto transits are a power up if you let them
It
be.
really, yeah.
If you let them
Hmm.
be, because you can come out the other side shiny and new in a way that is just incredibly empowering.
Yeah. I very much had to learn to let Pluto just do what Pluto was going to do. And I'm so, so grateful to astrology because I'm just like, oh my gosh, all the times that I was so unkind to myself when I was just going through a rough transit, it makes me remember that people mostly don't need like harshness or punishment. People mostly need
Yeah.
kindness. We mostly need gentleness. And that was really what I needed. And now I give that to myself now.
Right. Yeah.
Because now I didn't have that consciousness. I didn't know about. Wasn't following astrology, and now it makes sense also why I grew up in a church and they were like astrology is the devil, and I'm like, because they don't want you to know yourself.
Right. Yeah.
So much of American culture, our religions and everything, are meant to not know yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's they think that we're witches and all this stuff, and some of us are. I'm not, but I'm sure somebody would think I'm a witch if they, looked at the shit I got in my house.
Christians do witchy things
Oh
too. They
my,
just call it something
they
else.
do. They do. They
Like,
do a
what's
lot of rituals and weird stuff. Like, what are you guys doing? Drinking blood?
like? I think I'm just going to say, like, you guys do communion.
Yeah. Well, and then if
That's
you're
witchy.
Catholic, the transubstantiation thing isn't. You're drinking blood, or they believe they are.
Yeah.
Actually, that was always kind of fascinating to me as somebody who grew up in more of a Protestant environment. So different than Catholicism, so different. So I went to Catholic school for a couple years, and I was like, this stuff is like weird. The rituals and stuff. It is a lot witchier.
It really is. I didn't grow up that close to Catholicism, but I learned about it later in life, and I was like, "Oh, that's what y'all were doing?"
Yeah, they got incense in there. They're swinging it around,
Exactly.
swinging
I'm
that
like,
thing.
it's so witchy in
It
here.
is. And then there's like gold everywhere. So, from your experience, like being a minister, being a missionary, do you feel like there was anything that you've kind of taken from those experiences that you find useful now?
Oh, 100%. I've actually been thinking about how or if I wanted to like talk about that a little bit more, either on my TikTok or on my own podcast, because there's a lot that I still incorporate into how I like talk about things or how I communicate with people. Even like evangelizing the people, it has this negative connotation, but because of how Christians use it, but we all kind of evangelize about different things. And right now, for example, a lot of people are talking about Palestine in a way, and I'm seeing people trying to get people to care about what's happening in Palestine. And it's like, you're not going to be able to reach that person by shaming them or screaming at them. And the only way I know that is because I've been evangelizing
Right.
people before, and I know how to get people to care about something that I care about, and I've had a lot of practice with that.
Yeah.
And so like now I just use it for collective liberation.
Right. And you have 3 planets in that ninth house, so I bet you were good at what you did. You got your Mars, and then you've got Uranus and Neptune there as well, so I can just see you preaching away.
Sometimes I still wonder if it'll come back. Like I think about I loved like preaching sermons, and I would totally do like a non-church church. Like it's not a church, but it's a gathering of people, because when you really think about it, these Christians, the reason that evangelicalism is able to have such a hold on our society the way it is now is the Christians are together all the time.
Oh, yeah. It's so funny what you're saying. I've literally said exactly what you're saying right now, like, exactly.
Yeah, I think about this all the time. They're in church every week. Their kids hang out together. They're socializing together. They do mutual aid together. They don't call it that,
Yep.
but they do that. They have all these things that leftists are like, we need this, we need that. I'm like, the church has that. We don't have access to it because I'm Black and queer,
Mhm.
and I have ideologies that they would
Yeah.
not support.
No, they have
But
childcare, they share
yeah,
stuff. If somebody has a baby, all that baby stuff gets redistributed. I know my dad's side of the
yes,
family is still in the church very much. So I watch them do mutual aid all the time. And
yeah.
no.
They don't call it
Yeah.
that, but that's what it is. And I'm like, we need, if there was anything, like I would totally get a building and do a non-church church. Like it's not church, but it's kind of
Yeah.
like church.
I've said the same thing about leftists for a long time, and I have said, I think I even have a note in my phone about it, that I want to do something that is like what church
Mhm.
is, but for people that care about
Yeah, and it's
collective
kind of funny
liberation.
because my friends and I have been talking about, because we talk about this all the time. We've kind of been talking about how, in a way, Palestine rallies are starting to become that, because they're so frequent and
Right.
they're happening all the time, and they could have the movement is, yes, to stop the genocide, but it's also about collective liberation. If we utilized it in that way, it could be so much more powerful for us as individuals. It's not getting utilized that way, but it could be. It could be that. But I
Mhm.
think seeing so many leftists gather like this on a weekly basis is showing that there is a need to have something like that. Because I still think
Absolutely.
about, there are things that I could do a sermon right now. Like I literally
Go, go.
okay, if I was gonna do a sermon right now, the thing that I would probably talk about is The Matrix, and not in the way that you think about it. When Neo is pulled from The Matrix, one of the first things that he does is rest, and I think that we miss that part, because, like, we just are like, he becomes amazing, he becomes this, he becomes that, because he was able to rest and heal. And we don't know how long, because it's a movie, right? It's silly. Like, we don't know how
Mhm.
long he took, but let's say let's say there was a month between him coming out and actually going back in. I mean, it probably wasn't, but like, there's so much there in just a little message of like, when you are coming out of decolonizing your mind and reclaiming your spirituality or taking back your power, you're going to be fucking exhausted probably, because the ideologies that we've held on to have been so harmful to how we live our lives here. And most of us are living out of sync with how we really should be living. And so when you start to decolonize, one of the first things I realized is like, I just rest a lot more. I rest so much more than what I used to. And so if I was going to do a sermon right now, it'd be about that. We have a lot of work to do, but we don't get
Mhm.
that work done by making ourselves more busy. We actually probably need to rest a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we've all been conditioned to hustle all the
Yeah.
time, and that leaves us no time to digest and
Yeah.
process and restore in the way that we need to, because this is a lifestyle
Exactly.
change that we need to make. That's the thing, I think, that maybe people that kind of are coming out of the women's march, or we go to a march every once in a while, and that's the problem being solved. It's like, I went to a march and da da da. Not that marches are bad, not that rallies are bad, but I think that people, that's kind of where it
Yeah.
ends. They don't know what else to
Yeah.
do. And it's because it isn't this like instant shift that we're going to see.
Yeah, and it
It's
should, but it should also be deeper. I think that sometimes we need to
mhm.
do a better job is when we go to these marches and rallies, whatever they're about, talk about the issue that you're obviously there to talk about, but also understand that there's something deeper happening when we gather. When we come
Oh, yeah.
together, there's so much power and energy in that space to not connect it to something deeper and then help people to connect it back to their life. And that's something that I learned from being a minister. It's like, if you want someone to understand the Bible or understand something you're trying to pull from the Bible, you got to make that shit practical for them. You got to connect it back to something that comes from our human experience. And I think for me, it's very intuitive. Like, I can stand in front of a crowd and kind of feel the crowd. And so it helps me to be able to listen to what they need because I can feel it. And you only
Yeah.
have that intuitive experience when you know yourself.
Yeah, and you know to
Mhm.
listen for those cues and those feelings, and you're in touch with the
Yeah.
intuition and you take it seriously.
Yep. So I could do an
Yeah.
unchurched church, like, tomorrow.
I would love that. I think that that's a wonderful idea because I have thought about this for years. Like, this is what part of what makes conservatives have the power that they
Mhm.
have is
Every Sunday,
because
they have
they
a captive
are,
audience, and they fill their head with a lot of interesting things.
yeah, and they are in community with each other, to the point where they're actually like it's just a part of
It
their
is.
life to contribute to other people, and leftists are famously very disconnected from each other and
Mhm.
often arguing.
And I think a lot of leftists have probably been hurt by religious organizations, not even Christianity, but
Yeah.
beyond that, and other spiritual communities that aren't even an organized, official
Mhm.
organized religion. I think there's been a lot of harm there, which is why I try to talk to, like, a lot of my local organizations that I rub elbows with. Like, I think we need to have that awareness as we are organizing people and fighting for collective liberation, that there's a lot of trauma there, which is why people are not going to be so gung ho sometimes to join an organization or jump right into another group. But there's a
Yeah.
way to do it, and there's a way to create an environment where people can get what they need and get the community they need
Mhm.
without, like, indoctrinating them or manipulating them or looking past their humanity and thinking we just need a body in this organization.
Yeah, and I love the conversation that you've been having on your podcast about finding an organization and helping people get more plugged in and thinking about how they want to do that. If they want to go with an organization that has a little bit more structure or if they want to move more independently. So I think if people are looking to do that at this moment, which I would highly encourage, as I do often on this podcast, because I think we all need to be plugged in. We all need to be living our
Mhm.
values, I think, in a real way. Because as we can see, there are a lot of other people that are living their values that are in direct opposition to ours. You know, we're on the chopping block. So it really benefits us to get together and share our ideas and work together to build better systems. So I really encourage people to listen to It Really Is That Deep and check out Kendall's resources on that. Also, Kendall has a Patreon. I'm a member of Kendall's Patreon. I'm very happy to be a supporter of the work that you're doing. So I want to encourage listeners to make sure that they go check out your podcast and your Patreon as well. So thank you so much for being here and having this conversation and sharing about yourself and your experience.
Thanks for having me and letting me cry on your podcast. I love.
Well, I really enjoyed having that conversation with Kendall, and I think it really is the perfect energy as we head into this Jupiter Uranus conjunction. But as I said before, this week is very interesting astrologically, and that is not the only reason. We have a lot of other astrology happening, and it's big stuff, it's intense stuff. So it's going to mean that we need to give ourselves some extra self-care. We need to check in with ourselves, not bypassing how we're actually feeling, and not putting it on other people either. And watching out for reactive people. You know, if somebody else decides to react to you, if you don't have to engage with them, maybe it's not the best idea this week in general. I think people are going to be a little extra sensitive, especially if they're not very conscious people. Another big astrological event we're having this week is the sun is moving into the sign of Taurus on Friday, April 19th. That is happening early in the day here in the US. And if you're sensitive to energy, I find that when the sun moves signs, it's pretty noticeable. So you should feel a shift. And Taurus energy is a lot slower. It can be a lot more deliberate than Aries energy tends to be. So enjoy the last bits of Aries season here. We still have Venus in Aries and, of course, Mercury retrograde in Aries. So don't worry if you're loving the Aries energy. There's still plenty more where that came from. And then that same day, we have Mars approaching that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction before it is exact. There is going to be a lot of intensity on Friday. If you're looking for predictions on what might happen that day on a more collective level, those are mundane astrology predictions, which you can find over on the Awake Space Astrology podcast. Lori Rivers does that type of predicting. That's not really what I'm doing here, but I want people to have a heads up if they're looking for that. Saturday, April 20th, as I talked about at the opening of the podcast, we're having the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, so that is also a very big day astrologically. And all of this big energy is walking us right up to that big, beautiful full moon in Scorpio on Tuesday, April 23rd here in the US. It'll be at 4:48 p.m. Pacific time. And it's happening at 4 degrees and 18 minutes of Scorpio. Full moons are really about receiving. And if you want to know what you might be receiving for this full moon, take a look back at the seeds that you were planting for the new moon in October 2023. It was October 14th. And if you set intentions for yourself, if you were starting some new plans or building upon existing plans at that particular moment, you might be starting to see some of those seeds coming to fruition for this full moon. So it may be the fruits of your labor, the energy that you've put in whatever direction that you were putting energy in back then. You might even have some new awarenesses or realizations about those projects, whatever those seeds were. And you might have some transformative new awarenesses around those matters for this full moon. You might get a better sense of what you need to do to empower yourself fully as you move forward with this energy. So it could be some new ideas kind of building upon what you have going on already. And because it's in the sign of Scorpio, some of these awarenesses that you might find yourself coming to for this full moon may be very feelings-based. You might find that you feel more deeply about certain things than you thought. And I would heed those emotional cues. What are they telling you that you need to transform? Do you need to kind of let yourself step up and step into this energy that you've been laying the groundwork over these past 6 months? Full moons are often a time of release, and the reason for that is in order to kind of step into that sense of your own power, to be more strategic, to really give it your all, whatever it is that you've been putting that energy toward. Oftentimes we need to let go of the stuff that isn't serving us anymore, isn't really working in our favor for us moving forward in the most empowered way that we possibly can. And that in and of itself can be very emotional. It can be emotional to let things go that haven't been working. It can be emotional to realize, oh, actually, I have been holding myself back in this area, instead of letting myself be more empowered, be more secure, be more strategic. Now, I am a Scorpio. I have a Scorpio sun and Mercury and Pluto, of course. I love being a Scorpio. I'm a plotter, I'm a planner in a certain way. And I like to think that I can take any circumstances that happen to me and use those strategically to empower myself to move forward. And I think that you can do that too. I think that no matter what life throws at us, we always have a choice if we want to take something from those experiences and use it to help us move forward, whatever it may be. Even the crappy stuff I've learned from, and I've empowered myself with it. One way or another, I find a use for everything. And that Scorpio energy is very good at recycling. So I would encourage you for this full moon, whatever emotions come up, whatever feelings come up, whatever realizations come up that let you know how you might best move forward. Hear those things. Don't be afraid of what comes up. And that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be bad or you're going to be crying all day. Full moons often do coincide with, big emotional moments, feelings, spaces. It's big energy. But a Scorpio knows better than anyone else that emotions are not weakness. They can be tools. They can reveal information to us. So whatever awarenesses that you find yourself receiving around this full moon, look at them honestly and fearlessly, and know that you are a very powerful being. And for this full moon, it's a great idea to accept that about yourself. Receive that awareness that you are a transformative and empowered being. And it may be time to adopt some new tactics, some ways of going about things that you want to go about in order to move forward in the most empowered way possible. All right, that is our show for today. If you're interested in being one of the first to receive my book, How to Find Community Using Your Astrology, don't forget that you can become a sponsor of this podcast by joining Patreon. The link to do that is in the show notes. And again, that'll be out this Saturday, April 20th, in celebration of that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. This episode was produced by Lori Rivers and brought to you by my sponsors over on Patreon.